I'm sure everybody's done this a million times. So I get to kick us off with a few fun facts. I did a little bit of challah research. Yes, that's a thing. Because I wanted to share a little bit more about why we braid challah and why we create round challah for the new year. And one of the things I read that was kind of interesting was that the making of challah, and particularly making the round challah, is one of the most universally practiced traditions among Jews, even around the world. So I thought that was kind of interesting. So what is challah? So it's actually a part of the loaf of bread that you remove from the bread as you're baking it, and it used to be set aside as a burnt offering. And it was taken to the priest. Now we're told to save it and burn it in your oven after you bake the bread. And the blessing you say is, "Blessed are you, Lord our God, ruler of the universe, who has made us holy and commanded us to separate out the challah portion from the dough." And it's basically a prayer for abundant food for our families and recognizing that this is a gift from God. So it's kind of interesting that connecting that prayer to baking bread takes something that is very basic and kind of mundane and elevates it to a spiritual level. And I think that's something fun that we get to do. And whether or not you say the prayer, you certainly can take the opportunity and take the time to reflect. It's a good time to reflect on the new year. And some have said actually that braiding or twisting the dough, which is what we will do, is actually reminiscent of pulling that piece of dough off that we set aside. So the rabbinic terminology says that challah is the piece of dough, but as Jews, we make things be what we want them to be. So now we call our whole loaf of bread challah, and that's the way we know it. So round challahs are very interesting. There are lots of variations, which I'll share a couple of them with you. The one I think most of us have heard about is that the round challah is for the new year, because the new year is round, it starts over again. But the thing I liked when I read about this is perfecting our actions of the previous year, doing acts of kindness this year, we are amending previous year's errors. And so eating a round challah acts as a reminder to think about our life, our choices, our accomplishments, and the new year ahead. So I thought that was very nice. The other uniqueness for Rosh Hashanah challah is there's a little extra honey or sugar for a sweet new year. And at the new year, instead of sprinkling salt, which we do on Shabbat, we actually dip our challah in honey. And who doesn't love that? And then through this act, we can become connected more to our grandparents, their grandparents, and the generations before. So you didn't know that challah had so many wonderful things with it. The last interesting tidbit before I throw it back over to Marilyn is the different shapes that we use. And there's so many of them used in different cultures and countries. And so this is kind of fun, but the reason I thought this was even more important is if, let's say, you take your challah out of the oven and it comes out looking a little different than you expected, maybe not exactly what you thought it would be when you put it in. So then what you say is, "Oh no, my challah is in the shape of a crown. This is for crowning God as the king on Rosh Hashanah." Or you could say, the Jews in Morocco, they emulate animals like a swan or a gazelle or a head like lion, like the Lion of David. And so, no, my challah looks like a gazelle, see? And then there's the traditional challahs that are like ladders or keys, and the ladder was fun. So the ladder serves as a reminder during the pre-fast Yom Kippur meal that God decides who will ascend and descend the ladder of life. And then the lesser known is embellishing a round challah with birds, or shaping the entire challah in the form of a bird and recalling the phrase, "As hovering birds, so will the Lord protect Jerusalem." So think of your round challah as a way to distinguish the already sacred as something even more special for the new year, and mark the holiday as something different and something special for us all. And speaking of special, I'm actually honored to introduce Marilyn. I know everybody knows her. She's our very own resident challah expert. I can personally attest to her wonderful recipes. I've tried them many times, and I know my family's enjoyed them as well. So Marilyn is a home baker who's been making and perfecting challah since early in her marriage, which I think was just a couple years ago. Um, sorry, dogs have a wonderful sense of timing. So Marilyn's mom used to make challah each week, and Marilyn has many fond memories of the smell and taste of challah baking on Shabbat and the holidays. But even more than her talent, the best thing is that Marilyn is extremely generous with her challah. She shares her skills and experience and her love with us and our wonderful Jewish tradition. So with that, I will monitor the chat and turn it over to Marilyn.
That's very nice, Lisa. Thank you. And I'm really glad that everybody could come to join us tonight and to be in my kitchen. Before we actually get started, if anybody has put their dough in the refrigerator and they took it out and it doesn't look like it's risen enough, or if for any reason it doesn't look like it's risen enough and you do want to braid with me, turn your oven on to the lowest temperature now. And then when it reaches the temperature, turn it off and stick your dough into the oven, and hopefully it will be fine by the time we get to the point of braiding. But anyway, I hope we'll have a fun night of making and braiding challah, and that we'll have a delicious challah for Rosh Hashanah. This recipe is big enough to make at least 2 challahs. You can make one for Rosh Hashanah, one for Yom Kippur Eve, or for breaking the fast. And I really felt like, even especially with COVID now, we really want to connect with our traditions, and the idea of kneading and shaping the bread of the earth like our ancestors makes this comfort food really more special now. So I picked this particular recipe when Marion and Fern asked me about doing this program. I got on the website and searched the web like I like to do, and I found this recipe, and it caught my eye for a couple of different reasons. Number one, it's got a little extra oil and honey because I like a sweet challah for Rosh Hashanah, and also a little bit more decadent. And it also uses dried apples. So if anybody has ever made, I know Robin Popick misread the recipe and used fresh apples. If you try to do this recipe with fresh apples, you'll end up with a pretty sticky mess, and it's a little unpredictable and it's harder to braid. So this one is going to be a little more predictable and easy to use, and I think it'll also be delicious. Okay, so let's get right to it. I'm going to tilt this a little bit, and we're going to start mixing our yeast and our water. And just a couple things about yeast. Well, I'll just talk before I do it. There's, rapid rise yeast, instant yeast, active dry yeast, and they're all, what I read recently, they're really all the same. The difference is that they're coded differently. The instant yeast is designed to be mixed in your bread flour. You don't have to mix it with water, but it is also designed to be used with a bread machine. So if you're doing it by hand, it's still better to put it in the water first to activate it, because the bread machine can beat and incorporate the yeast very quickly and easily, whereas you don't have as much force when you're using your hands to knead. So I'm going to go ahead and do this in the water. The temperature of the water should be about 95 to 110 degrees. If you get too close to 115 or more than that, it's going to kill the yeast. So proofing the yeast in the water is a good way to make sure that you haven't got your water too hot and that the yeast is alive. And you can either use an instant thermometer to check your temperature, or if you don't have that and you just run your hand in the water, obviously a clean hand, then it should be like a bath water for a small child that you would not want to, to burn. So I'm going to get my water, and I'm going to move away for just a second. Okay. I have an Insta-Hot, so I can just mix some tap water and regular water.
So Marilyn, while you're mixing, one question, what about using fresh yeast?
There was a time in my life where I wanted to use fresh yeast and I couldn't find it. And I find it harder to come across. So I usually just use the active dry yeast. But I think a lot of the professional bakers do use fresh yeast. And I think you know, I read something on that recently. If I get a chance, I'll look it up, but I think that you use the same amounts. Okay, so I'm just measuring, eyeballing at eye level, and this is, let's see, it's 99, 100 degrees. So that should be fine. Okay. Forgot to get my yeast. All right, so this recipe says 3 teaspoons of yeast, which Beth reminded me 3 teaspoons is 1 tablespoon. It could have just said 1 tablespoon. I'll make it easier. So here is a tablespoon of yeast. Let me tilt this down a little bit more. Okay, and I'm just going to sprinkle that in. And I don't know why I like to not put metal into my yeast water, so I'm going to use a spatula. Sometimes I do, but I'm not going to do that here. I'm just going to use a plastic silicone spatula. Okay, and the tablespoon of sugar. Here's my sugar. And the sugar helps the yeast activate a little bit faster because the yeast grows, it eats up the sugar. And then when it's mixed in with the dough, the yeast eats the dough, the sugars of the flour, and starts producing gases, and then that's what causes the dough to rise. So I'm just going to set this aside while I get my apples and raisins going. So the recipe didn't call for raisins, but I thought raisins would be good in it. And okay, so there are my apples. This is already 2 cups worth here. I'm going to put that in my food processor. And so you might be wondering why I said to put your raisins into the food processor. And the reason I like to do that is because when you pulverize the raisins, or it doesn't have to be a mush, but when you pulverize them a little bit, it spreads into the dough and it gives the bread a really different, unique flavor and a little bit of a richer consistency. And I found this by accident when I was using a bread machine a lot. I put my raisins in at the beginning, and because that beater was just beating the dough so hard as it was kneading it, I noticed that my raisins were not, you know, individual raisins anymore. That was just spread out through the dough. And I really liked how it tasted. It just tasted totally different. So if you like a raisin to bite into, don't do this. But if you do like a raisin to be throughout the dough and you want to try it, let's go for it. So, right. So do we know, is anybody actually doing it with me, or is everybody just braiding? Do we know?
Yes, we do. I don't know exactly, but it looks like just about everybody's either braiding or observing.
Okay.
I didn't have anyone reply that they were actually making the dough with you.
Okay. Well, that way I won't worry if I feel like I'm going kind of quickly, so we can get to the braiding part. All right. So I'm going to go ahead and do this.
So Marilyn, have you ever tried this with figs or dates?
I haven't. I saw a recipe that was fig and rosemary, and fig jam and rosemary. It looked really good, and that's going to be something I try next. This is just about done. Okay, and I want the pieces of the apple to be relatively small because once I start braiding the dough if it's too chunky. I mean, you can still do it, but your chunks may be sticking out, and it might be just a little bit easier, especially if you are, not very comfortable with braiding. If you are, great. You can just do it however you want. But anyway, so this is what I've done with the apples and the raisins. Okay, so now I'm going to put in the flour, and I just wanted to talk a little bit about flour. Just like anything that you cook or bake, you want to use a really high quality of flour. I know with COVID, it's been hard to find, specific brands that you might be looking for, but one brand that I have been reading a lot about, I've been doing a lot of other kind of bread making lately, making sourdough and artisan bread, and a lot of the books that I am reading talk about King Arthur flour, and I've been using King Arthur flour for years, and I love it. I think it makes a great bread, and I was not able to get it when I was looking for it, so I got Costco flour, which is usually Costco products are pretty high quality, so I got the Costco flour, and I got some organic whole wheat flour. All of my flour is organic, and then another fun thing is that I couldn't find bread flour, so I found out that you can make your own bread flour. Just a little tidbit of information. I've been doing some vegan baking, so I have some vital wheat gluten. And so what they say is for every cup of flour, if you remove 1.5 teaspoons of the flour and put in 1.5 teaspoons of vital wheat gluten, that turns your flour into bread flour. And basically bread flour just gives your bread a little bit more of a chew. It gives it more protein. So it does make the bread a little bit different, but it's not something you have to worry about if you don't want to. There are plenty of people who never use bread flour, and the bread still comes out good. It's just, it is something you can play around with if you want. So when you are scooping your flour, if you have a bag of flour, one thing that I usually do right before I scoop out my flour is to just take a spoon and stir it up a little bit, because you can put too much flour in a cup. Even though it's a measuring cup, it's really unpredictable. If you pack it down, you're going to get a lot more flour. Or if the flour is already packed in the bag and you just scoop directly in the bag, you might get too much flour. So you can just use a spoon. This is here. Okay, so this is bread flour that I mixed with the white flour and the vital wheat gluten. So I'm just going to scoop it out with a spoon. And then I'm not that much of a perfectionist, so I'm not getting a knife out or anything, but
so Marilyn, one comment was, do you recommend weighing your flour, which I know some people do?
Yeah, when you're making like artisanal breads and sourdough breads, almost every recipe you're going to find that they tell you to use a kitchen scale. For some reason, when you look at recipes for challah, you never see it in terms of weight. It's always just cups. So, there's a lot of forgiveness in a regular dough. I think some of the artisanal breads, you have to be a little bit more careful, but and I was going to look it up and let you know about how many grams is in each cup, but I can do that later if we have a chance. I didn't do it ahead of time, I forgot. So I've already stirred up this flour here, the whole wheat, so I'm going to put in 2. This is 4. Okay, I'm going to do 1 more of this one. So that'll be 5 cups of flour. And I know there are quite a few people on the program tonight that are also really good bakers. Like I don't know everybody, but I know Maxine and Anna. A lot of people do a lot of bread baking. So if there are any comments that you'd like to add, please do. We can learn from each other. Okay, so that is 5 cups of flour, and I'm going to just have 1 more cup of my whole wheat ready. The 2 times I've made this, I've used almost the full 6 cups, so I'm just going to have it ready to go. So this is my dry stuff. I've got the flour.
So Marilyn, can you talk for a minute about whether you change the proportions if you use whole wheat versus a regular white or a bread?
When I use whole wheat, the main, especially if I'm just changing the recipe myself, which I do a lot, I just try to be cued into the fact that you probably want a little bit more moisture in your dough. Whole wheat does absorb more moisture, and it'll be too dense. It won't rise as well if it doesn't have that moisture. So I usually just am aware of it. When I'm adding that last little bit of flour, if I'm doing whole wheat, I try to leave it a little bit on the sticky side. Not much, but just enough that I know it will still rise well. So that's about all I do. But if anybody else has any suggestions, please chime in. Okay, so this is, again, I don't measure things completely perfectly, so I just use my finger instead of a knife. Okay, that is pretty close to 2 teaspoons. I'm going to do my cinnamon. Okay, so the cinnamon I added to the recipe, the cinnamon and the vanilla, and you really, with only a half a teaspoon, you barely taste the cinnamon, but it gives it just such a unique flavor. You kind of taste it and think, what is that? If you really like cinnamon, you can probably add a full teaspoon. I'm going to go ahead and I do love cinnamon, but I'm going to do a half a teaspoon because I thought it was really good that way. And the vanilla also gives it a really special sweetness. I want to show you the yeast. Let's see if I can get the picture. I don't know if you can really tell, but it's really foamy and it looks like it's fine. So when I add that to my liquid ingredients, it should be good. The other thing I like to add to my doughs, I really love texture. So a lot of times I will throw in oatmeal, 7-grain cereal, flaxseed, just kind of whatever I have. And I just measure it out. Like if I take out that amount of flour and put in that amount of whole grain. So just another fun thing to try if you want to. Okay, so we've got the flour, the salt, the raisins, and the cinnamon in the dry. And then the wet is going to be a half a cup of oil, a half a cup of honey. And you probably know the little trick that if you measure your oil before the honey slides out really easily. So that's what I'm going to do. Half a cup of oil.
So Marilyn, while you're measuring, one question from Beth. She had not pounded her dough after the first rise. Should she do that now or wait until you get to the next step?
I think she should just wait. Yeah, you're gonna, by the time, we get to it, it's gonna be pretty soon and you'll have to smush it down to braid it. So no need doing it any sooner than necessary because the reason to punch it down would be to let it rise again, and there's not going to be time for that. So I think just don't do that, Beth. Okay, so that's my oil, my honey. I need 2 eggs. And I'm sure you know in kosher cooking that you always do 1 egg at a time and you check it to make sure there are no blood spots in it. So that's number one. Oops, I was going to beat that first. Put that in another bowl. And eggshells are compostable. So if you are inclined to do that, that's a good idea. I'm going to beat my egg. All right, throw that into the liquid ingredient. And then I just need the vanilla, a teaspoon of vanilla. And the yeasty mixture. So I'm going to put all that together. All right. So just makes it easy to incorporate everything if you stir the liquid ingredients on their own and then the dry on their own. Okay, so I'm about ready to put this together. I'm going to just pour the liquid in, and I'm going to use a spoon just to get it started, and then I'll turn it out onto the counter, which I've already cleaned. And I'm pretty sure I'm going to be using that extra cup of flour again because it's pretty moist. But I tell you, it's so nice that we got the cold front today, because as soon as it starts to get a little cool, the idea of apples and raisins and cinnamon is exactly what I want to be cooking with. So it just always makes me want to think about that. And I've always just really enjoyed, I don't know, cooking and baking. I feel like it's a time just to be in the moment and just think about what you're creating. And I just want to encourage everybody to really be present when they're making their dough, and when they put their hands in it, to really feel it, to get to know the consistency of it, the texture, the moisture, and it's just really a time to, I mean, I know it can be hectic, but it just feels like a time to relax to me. So, all right.
Carolyn, do you find a difference between doing the whole thing by hand versus using, let's say, a dough hook on a mixer?
Yeah, definitely. The dough hook will do it a lot easier, and it kneads it well, and it helps when you knead it. What you're doing is you're improving the gluten in the dough so that it will bind, and using a dough hook is a really nice thing to do. And I was doing almost all of my challahs with the dough hook. Once I got past my bread machine period of time, I decided to start using the dough hook, and I really liked it. And then for some reason lately, I've just been doing them by hand. I mean, partially because I knew I was going to be doing this program, and I didn't know if everybody had a dough hook to use, and so I just thought it would be easier to do it by hand. But if you have it, I know Beth used her dough hook, and I think she was really pleased with how it turned out. It was, I think she said, the first time she has done it. So, all right, so I'm just kneading, and I'm sure most of you have done this. You just kind of push it out and then pull it back in. And I can tell it's pretty sticky right now. So I'm going to go ahead and start adding a little bit of the flour. This is my last cup here. And I'm going to get some of that flour on the counter. So as I push it around, it'll incorporate. And So again, I'm using whole wheat, so I'm being cautious not to put in too much flour. The thing I've found, at least from my experience, is that if you put too much flour in at the beginning, it's really hard to add liquid later. But if you put the flour in a little at a time, you can judge it better. And it's just hard going back if you overdo it. So I'm gonna really, think about my dough. It's still really sticky. I've used probably a little bit more than half a cup here of the extra flour. I think the recipe should just say 6 cups. But anyway, it's a good lesson in learning just to add that last cup of flour a little at a time.
So we have a kneading question. Do we have to be careful to not over knead, or is more better?
I've never had a problem with over kneading. You should actually feel the texture of the dough become smoother, especially if you're, like here I've got whole wheat, I've got apples, I've got raisins. It's a little bit hard to tell exactly what's going on with the texture of the dough, but I still will be able to tell that, that it's different and ready. But if you're doing like just a white flour recipe, and that's the only kind of flour you have in it, you'll really be able to tell the difference if you do it enough. And also with the food processor, or the dough hook on the mix master, you'll be able to see the difference and feel the difference. And I like to say that it feels kind of like a baby's butt. It's just nice and smooth, and you can tell that the dough has changed. Okay, I'm getting close. It's a good exercise.
So how much stronger are you since you started making bread?
Well, I'm stronger, but I also do my weights. Yeah. Especially can't get to the gym. So I do have a few free weights that I do my biceps and my triceps. Okay. So it's a little tiny bit sticky, but it's still holding its shape really nicely. And I might just put a teeny tiny bit more in, just because since I've done the recipe now 3 times, it seems like it could use just a little bit more, but that's about it. And then what I'm going to do is put about a tablespoon of oil in the bottom of the bowl. And then I'm going to put the dough in it, roll it around so that it is coated on all sides. So this is feeling good. It's feeling pretty smooth. And I think I'm going to leave it the way it is. Okay, so we're almost ready. So I don't know if you can, how well you can see it, but the raisins are just kind of spread out. You can see a few chunks. You can see, some few chunks of the apples, but the whole thing is kind of a brown from the mixture of the raisins and the cinnamon. And anyway, I think it's going to be really good. Okay, let me find my bowl.
And one more dough hook question while you do that. So the question is, do you use the dough hook for the whole thing, including mixing all the ingredients and the kneading?
Yeah, actually, I would probably do the yeast in a separate bowl so that you can proof it, but it's not as important to mix your dry ingredients and your wet ingredients if you're going to have something like a strong dough hook to help blend everything. The reason you do it separately is because you want everything incorporated evenly but a dough hook is going to do a pretty darn good job. So, oh, this is feeling really, really good. Okay, so I've just put the dough in here. I'm going to twist it. I'm going to flip it. I'm going to twist it some more. And that is all I'm going to do, and let that rest. So this, you do want to keep it covered. This bowl has its own cover, but if it does, got these bowls as a gift for my birthday, and it's got a top, so it's a great bowl to use for making bread. So if you don't have a top, put plastic wrap, and then I always put a towel on top, just because I do. I don't know. It's just my habit. And I'm just going to leave that alone for a few hours. And one other thing about the whole thing about putting it in the fridge. I, again, did this by accident, but then I've been reading about it. It is a thing that is even recommended when you're doing certain kinds of doughs, especially things like pizza and sourdoughs and things like that. You do want that long fermentation, and you put it in the fridge. It's really not a thing with challah, but I have made my challah, let it rise, and braided it, and then put it in a pan, covered it with plastic wrap, and stuck it in the fridge until the next day, which is usually Shabbat. And then I'll take it out, let it come to room temperature. It rises a little bit more, and then you can bake it. And that extra long fermentation increases the flavor of the yeast. And it also gives you the flexibility to have a fresh baked dough without having gone to the trouble of making it that day. And now with eggs in it, I probably wouldn't do it more than 2 days in advance. With certain things like pizza dough and sourdough breads that you're making, they say you can leave it up to 3 days. But I read that with eggs, you probably want to do it only 1 day or maybe max 2. So anyway, I'm going to put this aside for a little bit.
And then proofing it like you're doing right now, how warm of a place do you keep it?
That's a good question. It also depends on how fast I want it to rise. So it's been really funny. I've been talking to Beth all day because the recipe says it only takes about an hour or so to rise. So she started hers early, and an hour later it was not rising. Actually, I started mine early this morning, and an hour later it was doing very, very little. So I set mine on the counter because I knew that we weren't going to be doing it for hours. And I figured if it takes a long time, that's fine. It'll just allow that long fermentation. But if you're in a hurry, you can put it in the oven like I was talking about at the beginning. And it depends on the temperature of your house. It depends on the temperature of the day. It depends on the humidity. It's really hard to predict how long it's going to take to rise. Also, again, the more whole wheat, maybe take a little bit longer. So you want to give yourself plenty of time, and you can always play with the things like the warm oven or the refrigerator to prolong it. A lot of times I will put mine inside on top of my water heater, because the water heater closet is warmer than the rest of the house. So if you have a warm place in your house and you want to make your bread on the same day and you want it to be, an hour or so, then you might do something like that.
So if you, just as a kind of a tidbit, if you do put it in your oven to proof, and you have not put a little note on the outside of the oven saying that you are proofing it, and your sweet husband goes to start dinner and turns the oven on, it does create a little bit of a problem, like a burned towel and the dough that's not so good anymore. So just put a little note that says proofing dough in the oven, and everybody will know that it's there.
I think that was from experience, wasn't it, Lisa?
Yeah, that was from experience.
I'm going to wash my hands real quick, and then I'm going to show you a few of the loaves that I have made in advance so that you can look at the braids, and then we'll get started with that. So 1 second. I'm going to get it right back in the dough, so I probably don't really have to wash my hands, but They're kind of sticky.
The other thing I shared with Marilyn, when we were making challah and the girls were young, we used to let them each pick what color the challah would be each week.
Oh,
And
yeah.
so we would use Wilton, cake decorating colors, and sometimes we'd have purple, and sometimes we'd have blue. And so anytime we had guests and we cut into the challah, it was always quite a shock for people to see what color their challah was that week. It was quite fun.
I think now it's a thing where you can, use beet juice and blueberry juice and things like that to make colors. Okay, so this is the challah that I made from the recipe. I did actually cut into this one, but I think you can still tell the shape. This is the crown. It's missing its middle, but this is the crown. This is the basket weave, the round braid. And I think this is actually the hardest one to do, is the ring of braid. It's just a 3-strand braid, but getting the edges together just right. I mean, it's never going to be perfect, and you really don't want it to be. It should have some character to it. But this is the ring. And I wanted to tell you a couple other things that I'm not going to actually demonstrate, but I was reading, if you just want a round challah, you can always take your dough, shape it into 8 balls, and put it in a cake pan and spread it out like that. And then the dough will, as it rises, all of those balls of dough will touch each other, and you'll have a nice little shape. The other thing you can do along this same line is to do knots. Instead of just balls, you can do individual knots and put your knots in the pan. That'll give it a little bit more character. Okay, so I'm going to move these. Larry, actually, if you don't mind, you could put these back in the bag.
So the dough that we just made, how many loaves does that make?
I made those 3, and they're good size loaves. So, I mean, I definitely think you could do easily 3. And if it's just like 2 people at home and you want it a little smaller, you can do 4. But anyway, so this is what I did this morning, and it's risen nicely. It's way up to the top here. So here's where you can use your kitchen scale, and I've only recently started doing this, but I find it really helpful that if you want, I don't think it matters that much when you're portioning out for each separate challah, but when you're portioning out for each braid, if you weigh the bread on the scale, then you're going to have equal sizes of dough that you can use to braid with. So let me just dump this out. And if you're doing it with me, the other thing I was going to mention, things like using fresh apples with cinnamon and sugar, or doing fig jam, like I was mentioning, the fig jam with the rosemary. Usually what they suggest is that you roll your dough out like a jelly roll, and then you layer the jam or the apples, and then you roll it up like a jelly roll, and then you can make it into a crown. But again, it limits what you can, the different shapes that you can do. There's not a whole lot that would be very easy to do that way.
So Marilyn, it looks like you did not flour your counter. Is that because you have the oil on it?
Well, it's got the oil on it, and it has, there's a little tiny bit of flour from what I was just doing, but if I don't need to add more flour, I'm not going to. I use it as needed. When I start rolling, if I feel like I just can't get a good handle on it, I might add a little bit of flour, but if I have too much flour, then it slips out of my hand too. So I'm not starting with any flour. And I don't know if anybody has one of these handy little dough cutters, but it's just nice to have. Okay.
It's okay if the dough at this moment feels a little bit oily since you just took it out of the bowl with the oil.
Yeah, it does feel a tiny bit oily, but it feels really good. It feels moist and it feels, you know, a little bit puffy, and it feels good. So, okay, I'm going to actually do thirds. Okay, so I'm just guessing that I've divided it in thirds, and I'm going to take out my handy kitchen scale. I put a little piece of plastic wrap on top of it just so that it doesn't get the scale all sticky. So this one is 19.5 ounces. This one is 20 ounces, which is pretty darn close. And that one is 22. So I'll just take a tiny bit off of this one. Okay, so that's now 21. Okay, so that they're all pretty darn close now. Okay, so now I'm going to start with the easiest one. The crown is the easiest one. It's one long rope. Can you see? When you're when you're rolling out your dough, you have to kind of have a press and stretch to get it so that it's all the same consistency throughout the length of the snake. And I'm squeezing it a little bit because I'm feeling some bubbles in here. And I think a lot of that has to do because there's so much in here with the apples. And when it rose, it created, you know, like I was saying, those gases. So I'm squeezing out some of the gas that I'm feeling in here. And I'm looking at it while I'm doing it, and it looks pretty uniform to me. It says my internet connection is unstable. I hope that's not a problem. Okay, so to make the crown, that's, like I said, it's the simplest one to do. You just basically make a coil. The only thing about it that is a little bit of a trick is as you get about halfway, and you kind of want to lift up the crown as you're finishing the snake so that it's got a little bit of a raised area to it. So that's it. That's very simple if you like the crown. All right, so now I'm going to undo this, and I'm going to make a flower, which some of you have seen me do before. And again, it's very easy and it's so pretty. It really makes a nice presentation. People wonder how you do it, but it's very, very easy. Okay, so you make one long coil, and again with the crown, you don't have to make it very thin. You kind of want it a little bit thick. I think and I guess it's really according to what you want, but I think it looks better if it's not too thin. And the same thing here. I'm making this long coil. It's all nice and uniform, and it's a little bit on the thick side. So hang on. Okay, so I'm going to take a knife. I don't know if you can see me very well. I'm going to try to angle this a little bit. I'm basically just going to make cuts through the long end of the dough. I'm not going to cut all the way through it because then it would slice it, but I'm making cuts at about 3/4 of an inch, maybe, all the way down. Oops, got an apple. Okay, and then, so I don't think you can see it very clearly. I'm going to see if I can flip this over so you can see that what it looks like. Can you see that I've made cuts all the way down one edge? Maybe? Okay. So what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to coil it up on top of itself. And then kind of attach that last part. Can you see? And when so now, I mean, it looks pretty nice just the way it is, but as it rises, everything spreads out a little bit. And then, you know, when it bakes, especially if you put that egg wash on, there's those darker and there's lighter, and it's really a beautiful texture. So that's my little flower. Anybody have any questions about that before we move on? Because that one's done.
You are doing such a fabulous job explaining. Everybody's doing great.
Okay, good.
I don't know if I get to see everybody because I didn't pin you so I could see what everyone's doing, but it's really fun because everybody is braiding along with you.
Oh, good. Okay, so I'm going to leave this one as a flower. This next third of my dough, I'm going to do the basket weave. And again, I'm going to portion it out into 4 pieces. So I'm going to use my kitchen scale again. And I'm going to eyeball it so I don't have to mess with it if I'm wrong, at least not too much. And I'm going to try to get 4 equal pieces, and that way it'll just make it a little bit more uniform. And let's see what we got. 5.86. Oh, that one's 4.37. I'm going to add a little bit more. Okay, so now that's 4.8. Oh, that's still more. See, it's really hard to eyeball. It's 4.76. And it does make a difference. Once you roll it out, it's like, whoa, that one's a lot longer. Let's see, this one had a little bit more.
And it possibly makes a difference because you've got the fruit in there as well.
Right. I mean, that's going to make it heavier, but at this point, I'm just trying to make it equal. All of my different portions, kind of close to equal.
Excuse us. Taking the crown. The crown. No, flower.
I couldn't hear.
How do you tuck it into the end of the flower?
Lisa, can you hear? Because I can't.
I think they're trying to, I can't hear that well, but I think they're trying to connect the end of the crown.
Oh, the flower?
Stick.
Yeah.
Oh, the end of the flower? You basically, it's wrapped on top of each other like a spool of thread. And when you get to the end, you just stick it to itself. So there's not anything to that. Let me find the end here. This is the end.
I don't know.
See, if I separated it out, and then I'm going to just put it back together, and I'm just going to pinch it a little bit. This dough is really nice and moist, so it sticks together really easily. Sometimes I have to add a tiny bit of water, especially if you've used flour on your hands. Sometimes the dough is too dry on the outside, and it won't stick to itself. So if you need to, you can wet your finger with some water and put it on the dough and then kind of mush it, and that'll help it stick to itself a little bit easier. Does that help? Okay, so I'm going to do the basket, and on this one, I'm basically just going to do 4 strands. So I'm going to roll it out, and again, how thin you do it is up to you. I would probably say mine is about 3/4 of an inch in diameter and about 15, 16 inches long. The other one was much longer, and it was probably a good inch in diameter, maybe even a little bit thicker. All right, so this one, I'm just going to try to get 4, once I roll one out, I'm gonna try to get the others to match it. So that they're all about the same. Okay. And here's my last one. I've done 3, and I'm working on number 4. So kind of pressing and stretching, but I want a nice uniform coil or snake. Okay. All right, I think they're ready. So now I'm going to have 2 lengthwise and 2 horizontal. I'm just going to lay them on the, just 2 on top and 2 on the bottom. But I want it to be a basket, so I'm going to have one of them go over and then under, and then I'm going to do the opposite with the other one. I'm going to have it go over and then under. Can you see that well enough? Should I wait just a second?
Yeah, tilt your screen down just a little bit more. I think that would help.
Okay.
There you go.
There. Is that, how's that? Is that visible?
Yes.
Would you say that's like a lattice?
Yes, for sure.
Okay.
Uh-huh.
Okay.
Okay. It's so nice. I can see a few of y'all are doing it. Okay, I feel like I should wait just a little bit because it looks like people are trying to get there. I'll have a sip of tea. So Maxine and Anna and anybody else, have any tidbits that they want to offer while we're waiting? Anybody who's made a lot of dough?
I think you're covering every base very well.
Thanks, Maxine.
You bet.
Marilyn, should all those strands of dough that you lattice be touching each other, like in the middle, or is there a hole in the middle?
It's actually it's a little bit loose right now, but as we start to twist it, it'll start to kind of push itself together.
Okay.
So yeah, I can see like a 1/4 of an inch or so, like right in the middle. I could push it a little closer together, but it doesn't have to be like completely sealed. I know Elaine Montoya was making a chocolate chip challah recipe. So I'm sure that will turn out really good. How could it not, right?
That was Cheyenne.
Oh, really? Good for her.
Yeah.
We have one that's making Becky's making a pumpkin.
Oh, I see, Becky. I have not ever done that. You're going to have to share your recipe, Becky. Oh, and then I'm actually looking at a little bit of the chat. Yes, I am going to sprinkle it with it says on the recipe I sent out, it gave proportions to mix a little bit of cinnamon and sugar and sesame seed, which is what I used on the ones that I showed you. It's 2 tablespoons of sugar, half teaspoon of cinnamon, and 2 tablespoons of sesame seed. And so one thing I want to mention about that is that it's kind of funny. You have to put the egg wash on so that your sprinkle will stick really nicely. But I have also done an experiment putting the egg wash on while it was raising, and I also did the egg wash right before I put it in the oven, and I've also done egg wash after I've put it in the oven for like 10 minutes and then taken it out and put the egg wash on. And it changes the texture of the dough depending on what time that egg wash goes on. So I don't exactly know how to explain the difference. To me, like the kind of challahs that you buy already made at the grocery store tasted more like the kind of putting the egg wash on while it was raising. And I personally prefer to put the egg wash on right before it goes into the oven. And I mean, I want it to taste different than a store-bought challah. So I like it better that way. And if you like a little bit more of a crusty challah, then you can wait the 10 minutes before you put your egg wash on, or you can put it on closer to the end. Okay.
The other thing, Marilyn, is when you let it rise and then egg wash it, I find that it covers more. So
right.
if you do it before and then it rises, there are spots that don't get covered.
That's true too. That's true too. Okay, I'm going to start twisting this up, and I'm hoping you can see. Let me see if I can lift up the back end of the computer so it'll be angled a little bit more. Is that better? I think so. Okay, so you notice that you have the unders and the overs. So I'm going to take the under and twist it to the left over the over the one next to it. And then now the one in the middle that was going vertically is under, and I'm going to twist it over. So each time I twist it, I'm having 3 on one side. Does that make sense? I'm going to take the under, and I'm going the same direction until I get to have made a full circle. So now I have done 4 twists, and each time I've gone from left to right, and I have gone from under to over. Does that make sense to everybody? I hope so. Okay, so now I still have some good tails here. So now I'm going to switch directions, and I'm going to go to the right. Instead of going to the left from under over, I'm going to go to the right from under over. So again, I'm going to go start at the same place. I've got my 2 horizontals this way and my 2 verticals this way. So I'm going to take the under and go over to the right. I'm going to take the next under, go over to the right. The next under, go over to the right, and the next under and go over to the right. So now my tails are getting pretty short. I can try to do one last twist, and I think I will a little bit, but they're barely going to touch each other. So I'm basically just going from, you know, I'm doing the same thing, but I'm going to go again back to the left. So I'm going to go over, 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 and this one barely touches. So the beautiful thing about this challah is that you tuck the edges under, and all of those little imperfections all of a sudden go away. And you end up with a gorgeous, I just think it's so pretty. I got something on my finger. Okay. And that's how that turns out. Wait, let me see. Wait, let me look at Anna's hunters. Wow, that's gorgeous.
You can't see everything. It's very
Really nice.
You do a good job, Marilyn.
Good job, Marilyn.
Thanks.
My
Okay.
mother's enjoying watching you.
Oh, that's so nice.
Hi,
Hi.
how
Okay.
are you?
I am good. How are y'all?
When are you opening up the bakery?
I've always kind of thought it would be fun, but I don't think I want to have that kind of pressure to have to do it, especially, getting up 5 in the morning, whatever. I'm an early.
Opening up at 5.
I think I'm a failure.
Oh, let's see, Maxine.
I got a loaf. I don't know quite how.
Well, you can turn it into a crown. You can always turn it into a crown. And
By just twisting it around.
if you wanted to just make it like here's a loaf. If I just make this longer, then I can go back to that first design that I showed you where you twist it on itself and then turn it into a crown. And
Okay.
honestly, if anybody wants to learn, like if you didn't quite get it and you want to do the basket weave another time, I'll do it with you. I'd be happy to. It'd be so much fun. Just the two.
There's a very nice YouTube also.
Oh, yeah. There's you're right. There's so many.
I mean,
on YouTube.
Yours especially lovely, but they go kind of slower.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So the last one we're going to do is the braided ring. And it seems like it's pretty simple, but like I said, the hardest part is just making it come together. So I'm going to just do 3. You can do 4, but 3, it looks beautiful with just 3. Like if I'm doing a long braid, I think 4 or 6 braids is really nice to do and it's fun to learn. But for the ring, it's going to come together and really just 3 strands is just fine. So
You need to angle it to the camera.
Yeah, so Marilyn, go ahead and tip your laptop down a little bit again.
okay.
There you go.
All right, so I am once again going to measure, and actually I think that the measuring is probably the most important for this one, because when you're bringing 3 strands together, you've got it lengthwise and you want to pull it together, you really need them all to be pretty equal. So this is about a little over 8. That's a little bit. Okay, let's see, 7.8. Wow, that's a lot less. No, I think I can get them all to about 7. Let's see, 7.13. Still a little bit more. Okay, that's perfect. Okay, these are all about a little over 7 ounces each. So again, I'm just going to make a long braid, and you probably want a little longer braid for this one, because it does have to make, not only are you going to be braiding it and that's going to shorten it, but you're going to have to bring the ends together. So I know when I did this the first time, I had to do it over again because it wasn't long enough. So this is going to be thinner and longer. I sure wish we were all in the Beth Torah kitchen. It would have been a lot easier and more fun, but I hope that you can enjoy this and make your own. Okay, so now this snake is pretty long. It's probably 2 feet. And it's about, I'd just say it's a little less than it's not an inch. It's probably a half, maybe 3/4 of an inch, half an inch. All right, so these all should be pretty equal since I measured it.
And Marilyn, by the time you get to the third one, is there any fear of the dough drying out or anything else you have to do if it's taking a while to get to the third loaf?
If it is taking a while or you get distracted, I would definitely, I think that's a really good point, I would keep it covered because it will dry out and it won't be as easy to roll and it'll kind of mess up your texture a little bit. So that is a very good point. All right, this looks almost the same length. And the other thing about this is you know, when you're making just a regular long braid, it doesn't matter that much if your ends are tapered. And a lot of times that's even a technique I've seen where it's fatter in the middle and thinner on the end. But because you're going to bring this back around to itself, you really want the ends of the dough to be just the same thickness as the entire braid. So you can see that's pretty uniform all the way. That way when, you know, it'll match itself on the other end and it'll match the just the entire length of it. Okay. You know, you could make a bird. I was thinking about what you said, Lisa. And this is how I'll, just for fun, since if anybody, I don't know if anybody's still trying to keep up with this, but if you take a strand and you make it into a knot, so then you can kind of pinch if you have, well, I didn't pull it through quite enough. So you can have the head here and the tail here, and then you can cut the edge of the back so that you have like a little tail, fluffy, and then you can take some other dough and make wings on both sides, and then you can put like a couple of raisins in there for the eyeballs. It's kind of fun. My mom taught me that, and for a different, making something not dough, but it is a dough, but it's not a bread dough.
And you didn't know you were in sync with all the Jews of Morocco.
Well, my parents were from Morocco.
Oh, there you
not
go.
Morocco, but North Africa anyway, Tunisia and Libya. Maybe.
Those traditions get handed down.
Yeah. Okay. I am just about, they look like they're 3 fairly equal strands. So I'm going to just do like a hair braid, just, you know, it's pretty simple. Just, I'll kind of just touch these two together. I'm not going to pinch them because they're going to have to be separate to attach to the other ends when I make the ring. So I'm just going to pretend like it's sort of attached and do I'm sure everybody knows, you know, the old 3-strand braid. You go take the outer one over the center one and then the outer one over the center one, just switching from right to left. And you're right, Lisa, I haven't used any extra flour because the dough is just behaving really nicely. Okay, so even though I've measured them out, I still have one little tail that's a little bit longer than the other. Well, I could always pinch that off if I needed to. Let me just see what happens. So I've got the braid and I'm just going to pull the edges together. And here it's you just have to kind of take a look at it and figure out, well, if it's coming under on this side, I'm going to pinch off this a little bit. This can be my challah. I can burn this piece. Oops, that one came off by accident. All right, so this is where you just have to hope that everything comes together the best that it can. And you have to play with it a little bit. I feel like I'm not very good at explaining because I really don't know what I'm doing, but I think it's going to look good. Yeah, actually, you can't really see. This is where they came together. It's a little bit messy, but if I showed it to you this way, you might not be able to tell. Oh, thanks, Beth. And anyway, also, keep in mind it's going to rise. You're going to put your cinnamon and sugar and your sesame seeds on top, and nobody's going to see if you don't do it perfectly perfect. So I'm not perfect, and just don't beat yourself up about it if you're not perfect.
And don't forget, when it comes out of the oven, there are at least 20 things you can say
Oh, you just froze up.
that it is.
Oh, you froze for a second. I didn't hear the very last thing you said.
Oh no, I just said when it comes out of the oven, if it doesn't look exactly like a braided ring, then you pick one of the other things on our many items.
Exactly. It can be an animal.
All
All right. So that is pretty much it. Does anybody have any questions about anything? I'm
Yeah,
gonna.
well, let's go ahead and unmute.
Oh,
I don't know
hey.
if
Beth,
Is that right? Can you
That's-
see it?
tilt it up a little bit. I can't see it. There. Very pretty.
Lovely.
That's really nice.
That's what do you call it? The one that you cut it?
The flower.
The flower.
Uh-huh.
Okay.
That looks really good.
Yeah.
Marilyn,
Yes.
are we going to let it rise until double again? I'm sure you have it in there, but
Yeah, you do want to let it rise until it's, definitely it should be puffy. You don't want it to be too puffy. And again, just from experience, it wants to be a kind of double, but it doesn't have to be super
okay.
big. And the other thing is once you
Yeah.
stick it in the oven, it'll probably even grow a little bit more from that activation of the heat.
Okay.
So it'll be.
Yeah, we could, if we're not going to be, we could put it in overnight, you think?
I didn't understand.
Okay, if we don't want to wait for it to rise again to where it needs.
Taking that shelf for me. Is this going to rise too much though?
I'm hearing two different.
Okay, if we don't want to stay up and bake it tonight,
Right. Put it in your fridge.
maybe put it in the fridge,
Right.
like covered overnight.
Yeah. Put some plastic wrap over.
Yeah.
I even use I try to tuck it around it. So I'll use maybe 3 different pieces if you have 3 different challahs. So I kind of tuck it around and then I put a towel on top of it and then I'll put it in the fridge.
Okay, good.
Yeah. So take it out, a little bit before an hour to an hour and a half before you want to bake it. Let it come to room temperature. You should see it rise just a little bit more. It will rise some in the fridge most of the time, but it should rise a little bit more. And,
Okay.
You say to wrap each individual challah in the plastic or just do one over all of it?
I use 3. I don't wrap it. I put it over it and I just tuck it.
You tuck it under.
So like if I've got this piece and it's on a pan, I'll just put it over and just kind of tuck it around it just to keep the air, it doesn't have to be.
Should be on a pan though, right?
Yes, this is on a pan. Imagine that's on a pan. And I always use parchment paper. I don't know if y'all do, but it's like a lifesaver. Just totally amazing product.
So
Marilyn, does it rise tonight and you put your sugar and your egg and stuff on top of it, or you just let it rise tonight and then you put your egg and stuff tomorrow?
Put your egg and stuff tomorrow, right before it goes in the oven. I mean, that's my preference. You could do it differently, but I always wait until it's risen, and right before it goes in the oven, I'll put the egg and the toppings on it.
Okay, so you rise it, you wrap it, you put it in the fridge, then you let it rise and cool, warm up.
You don't
and
even
then put
have
your egg and honey.
Robin, if you're going to put it in the fridge, you can just put it in the fridge. You don't have to let it rise first.
Oh, really?
Yeah. If you just take it out long enough tomorrow so that it has time to rise after it's out of the fridge.
Because it's only this big now.
It'll get bigger. It'll rise a tiny bit. It'll rise a tiny bit in the fridge. And then it'll rise more after it sits out on the counter. So you don't want to put a cold bread right in the oven. I think it'll mess up the time, of baking. The other thing.
I have two other baking questions.
Okay. Do I cook both at the same time?
So one is, can you at the same time in the oven?
Yes.
I need to get muted.
Yes.
Okay. And then the second is, after you bake it, how long does it keep? And then, do we need to make it again right before Rosh Hashanah, or will it keep that long?
Well, I always put it in the freezer. So I will, I'll make them and they will be perfectly fine and taste completely fresh. If you bake them, let them cool completely. Don't wrap them up until they're completely cool. Then you can wrap it, and I usually wrap it with foil, and then I'll put it in a Ziploc bag as well. The better you wrap it, the better freshness. So you can even take it out, a month later, and it'll be fine. But if you let's say you wanted it for tomorrow, you could eat it and leave it on your counter. It'll still be good for a couple of days. But I tend to like to slice. If I know that I'm going to want to eat on it for a while, I will slice it up and put it in the freezer and just take out a slice at a time. It's really good toasted. So.
And then can you freeze the dough before you bake it?
Oh, I am pretty sure the answer to that is yes. I was actually telling Lisa the first time I ever made challah on my own, I used to buy those boxes that you would get at the grocery store. They were in the freezer, and it was dough. And you took it out, you put it on your counter, it defrosted, and then it swelled up into a life-size challah, and you baked it, and that was pretty exciting. But then I realized I could make my own for not too much more trouble. So I'm almost positive you can do that. Probably, you know what, that would be a fun thing. I might actually do that. I might, since I have so many here that I've got 9 different challahs now. So I think I'm going to take one of them. I'm going to wrap it up really good, and I'm going to put it in the freezer as dough, and then I'm going to let it come to room temperature, and then I'm going to bake it and see. That sounds like a really good idea. Well, we'll have to exchange, results and see. But anyway, I think
we do cooking class part 2, right?
Yeah. And just one last thing about the baking. I was a little bit perplexed, I think, on the actual recipe. If you go to the link that I provided at the end, I think she's supposed to bake it like some really high temperature. And I don't like an overcooked challah. I feel like it dries it out, and I wasn't really sure. I didn't want to mess it up. And I know I made challah so many times at 350 that I knew 350 would work. So I think that's what I put. Let's see. Well, I said so I did it half and half. Preheat the oven to 425 and then turn it down to 350 right when you put your loaves in the oven. So that way, I think what that does is it creates a little bit of a crust, so that you have a nice crusty, bread, but it's still nice and doughy on the inside. And I mean, if you don't have an instant thermometer, you really should get one. It takes all the guessing out. I have taken challahs out of the oven when they're doughy inside. I've taken them out when they're way too dry. It's just, you just never know. So if you use your trusty thermometer, I try to get the dough to be between 175 and 180 degrees. If it's a little more, a little less, it's fine also, but that's kind of the sweet spot. And usually I will put my dough in, I'll set my timer for 20 minutes. And especially if with the egg wash, a lot of times it starts to get very dark at that point. So I take a piece of foil and I just lay it on top of the bread. I don't wrap it, I don't touch it, I just lay it on top just to prevent the heat going directly down on the dough. And I'll set the temperature for, the timer for another 7 or 8 minutes. And then I check it with my thermometer. And so between another 7 to 12 minutes, your challah should be ready. And again, if you like a nice moist challah, about 175 to 180 degrees internal temperature, it seems like it works for me every time.
So Marilyn, the recipe says 170 to 190, but it sounds like 170 to 180, 175 to 180 is what you're looking for.
I do 175, to 180, somewhere in there. It's not going to make too much of a difference.
Marilyn, what was the temperature of the oven that you said? What did you say to preheat and all?
On the recipe I sent out, I said to start out at 425 and then turn it down to 350 when you put your bread in the oven. So
okay,
it's only hot for just a very short period of time when you do it.
And I have a question about convection oven.
Oh yeah, I do convection. You're supposed to turn it down about 50 degrees less, so it would be closer to 300. Again,
would you say just bake it the regular way and not, the convection oven really doesn't?
I don't think it makes too much of a difference to do it convection or not convection. But one thing I have tried that's just kind of fun to do, I know that professional bakers will use a steam in their oven. So I have here I'll show you. If I'm hanging around the kitchen, I bought one of these things. I've only used it for water, so there's never been anything else in it. And I just open up the oven periodically and spray the challah. And it does do a little something different to it, so it's kind of fun. There's so many things you can do that are fun. And that's just touching the surface, what we've gone over. I mean, the main thing is, baking is a time to be creative. It's a craft that you want to do over and over again, and repetition is part of the pleasure. You get a rhythm, you learn the techniques, and you definitely learn to give it your personal touch. So
Marilyn, could you hold up one of your beautiful challahs or a dough? I want to take a picture so that we can share what you've done. And since we're not in person, I have to take a picture of the screen.
Okay, I should probably get you one that's already baked. So hang on, let me.
Lovely.
Pretty.
All right. Our very own Julia Child is
Anyway, I really enjoyed tonight. I was very nervous, but I enjoyed it. I hope y'all did, and I hope more importantly that you end up with a beautiful and delicious challah. And I would love to see y'all's pictures after they've been baked, or post them on Beth Torah Facebook page or something so that we can compare. But that would be a lot of fun.